Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. It's just a couple days until Election Day, and in this episode, we'll go over our final ratings changes and projections in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and in the presidential election. And we'll do it all with a very special guest, Kirk Bado of National Journal's Hotline. Buckle up.
I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan analysis for more than 40 years. I just spoke to a group here at the Hotel Hershey in Pennsylvania's 10th District, represented by Republican Scott Perry, one of the most competitive districts in the country.
Yeah, a tilt Republican district in our ratings, but what we're going to be watching early on election night to get a clue about how things are going. And I am Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections, and I just returned a couple days ago from a journey to Annapolis, Maryland, where I was speaking to a group as well. And that is in Maryland's 3rd Congressional District, which is currently represented by Democrat John Sarbanes, but as of next year will almost certainly be represented by Democrat Sarah Elfreth, who won the primary to succeed Sarbanes earlier this year.
Might be the only time she's been mentioned on a podcast. But we are excited to have a longtime friend of the podcast, but his first appearance, Kirk Bado, editor of National Journal's Hotline. Kirk, welcome to the show.
Guys, first time, long time. Really happy to be here. I grew up in PA 17, which is represented now by Chris DeLuzio, and in Kansas's 3rd, the Sharice David seat in the Kansas City suburbs. Really happy to be here with you guys.
And
wow,
we
didn't even have to ask the question.
Yeah,
he was ready. Knew. He was locked in.
I listen to this every week. I've been wanting to get asked this question for years. This is great.
He knows the drill. Now, Kirk, were you always interested in politics, or were you talk about your kind of the evolution of journalism and politics and what came first?
I was always interested in writing, in reading. I had a subscription to Time magazine when I think I was about 10 years old and would plow through that. What really got me interested in writing first off was my dad's Sports Illustrated. When that would arrive, I would flip to the back and read like the 800-word Rick Riley column. And that got me really interested in journalism and writing. And initially in college, I wanted to try and make a career out of reading and writing, but I also wanted to make money. So I was set on being a lawyer, even took the LSAT and everything too. But then I got involved in the student newspaper there, and eventually the Tennessean in Nashville. I went to school at Belmont University, and I realized after I got my LSAT score back that, you know what, I don't think I'm cut out for this lawyering business, but this newspaper and hobby that I got working is really fun, and I love the energy of it, and I decided to make a career out of that.
Yep, well, we're happy that you did, because that you're here with us, and you've been continue to be a great friend. I should also note that Kirk is also one half of the 2024 cornhole champions from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the Republican convention.
Defending champions, I believe. We have the title belt over Jacob, who I think a lot of people are still talking about his poor performance in that game. I think there's still some damage to one of the walls from one of the beanbags hit, Jacob.
Yeah. We don't like to talk about that.
But there is photo evidence. For those of you watching on YouTube, we'll try to put that up. We'll try to put that up there. So, what's great, and I know we need to move on, but in the right hand, far right hand corner of that picture, I believe is former Congressman, New York Republican Lee Zeldin, because we ended up crashing the New York Republican Party post convention that night unintentionally. But Kirk and I are the champions. I don't want to brag, but I just wanted to bring it up just so everyone knew.
Oh, it's an important factoid, I think, of the dynamic that we're bringing to this podcast here is that you and I just ran the table, and there might have been some other prognosticators on there as well from another publication. No free ads here, but let's just say
we're all friends. It's okay.
We did do a beat down on the Cook folk as well. So the NJ Inside Elections Alliance is going really strong.
I didn't know I would have to be defending my honor today on this podcast. I can't believe I have to wait until the 2028 convention to, reclaim my dignity. But no, not my finest hour there in Milwaukee at the Western New York Republican wing night that we stumbled into.
Well, you got 4 years to work on that toss and everything.
Exactly.
We'll get some reps in and everything in the off year.
I'll put together a training montage.
Well, I'm sure this is what everyone signed on to hear, to listen to. But let's move on to the big topics. With just a few days left to go, our outlook in the Senate is pretty favorable to Republicans. They need a net gain of 2 seats to reclaim the majority, and we have them favored. Our likely projection is a net gain of 2 to 4 seats for Republicans. But in yesterday's issue of Inside Elections, we made only one ratings change in an individual Senate race, and that's moving Texas from lean Republican to tilt Republican, which is just one step away from toss-up. Let's take a listen to a couple of the ads from that race from Republican Senator Ted Cruz and Democratic Congressman Colin Allred.
Harris called keeping boys out of girls' bathrooms hateful. Colin Allred voted for boys in girls' sports twice. On the economy,
the Inflation Reduction Act is now law. It's going to lower costs for families. It's a really big deal.
Bidenomics is working.
And on the border.
Let me be very clear. I'm not going to vote for a wall under any circumstances.
If they build that racist wall, my generation is the one that will tear it down.
Harris and Allred, 2 liberals, too liberal for Texas.
I'm Ted Cruz, and I approve this message.
As captain of Baylor, when you step between these lines, you're accountable to the whole team. If you don't deliver, next man up takes your job. You're cut. Well, Ted Cruz has been in Washington forever, but he's done nothing to fix the border. He wants to raise the retirement age, making you wait longer to get Social Security and Medicare. I'm Colin Allred. I approve this message because Washington could use a little Texas-style accountability. And Ted, I'm coming for your job.
Jacob, how does this Texas race fit into that overall picture and fight for control of the Senate?
Like you said, Republicans are still favored to take control of the Senate this year. The map just structurally is so much better for them than it is for Democrats, who are defending all of these seats on defense in red states, Ohio, Montana, West Virginia, in battlegrounds, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, even in blue states, Maryland, New Mexico. Not a lot of offensive opportunities. But if you're looking for a way for Democrats to maintain control of the Senate, which we don't think is the most likely outcome, Texas is the key piece of that path to victory, right? Because what that means is Democrats lose West Virginia, probably still lose Montana, but hold Ohio and then pick up a seat in Texas. And at the moment, that seems to be like the most likely universe in which Democrats somehow maintain control of the chamber. So this is good news, but it's good news in its own context. The larger context, of course, is Republicans on the precipice of taking back the majority.
And Kirk, where does Texas fit? You and your team at NJ do rankings and not ratings, I guess. So where does Texas fall? Which I don't envy you, because I think that's that's even more difficult sometimes. But where does Texas rank in the NJ rankings?
Yeah, so this week we released our updated rankings for House and Senate rankings, and you're right, we do it as a ranking. So we're asking ourselves constantly, do we think that this race here is more likely to flip than this race? And it's been pretty easy actually in the Senate this cycle. The map's been pretty consistent. The House is where it gets really messy. I think James Down, our House correspondent, and I spent about 7 hours or so over the last week or so just debating House races back and forth. But in Texas, in our final update, it's the only Republican held seat where that's being challenged by a Democrat. Nebraska did make an appearance on the back end of our list at 10. Texas moved up a single spot to 9. And even then, we do it as most likely to flip. It's moved up, but only because Florida and Maryland have kind of fallen off the map here for us. Texas is probably a Democrat's best pickup opportunity, but that's not saying a whole lot right now, as Jacob said, this Senate map this year is kind of like a scheduled loss for Democrats with the amount of seats that they have to defend here in deep red states. And their only offensive opportunities in a state that Trump carried, relatively comfortably here. They've raised a lot of money. You see a last minute investment coming in from national groups here right now. But I think it might be a little bit too little too late here to really push that across the line.
Yeah. And maybe Texas is still too Republican and just overall as a state. One of the things that stuck out to me, we obviously talked about the Texas race a lot when we were deliberating whether to change the rating, but there are a number of states that we didn't change the rating, and we almost spent maybe more time talking about it. When we left the Ohio Senate race in toss-up, which the race is even, but the trend has been against Sherrod Brown and for Republican Bernie Moreno. We left the Wisconsin Senate race between Democrat Tammy Baldwin and Republican Eric Hovde, as well as the Pennsylvania Senate race between Democrat Bob Casey Jr. and Republican Dave McCormick. We left those in our tilt Democratic category. Even though a strong case can be made for a toss-up, I believe that Casey and Baldwin are up by a point or two or so. I mean, they are very close races. So that's where we spend a lot of time on, what do we do? Do we keep those or do we change those?
Yeah. Well, and that's where our biggest movements have come as well. The Senate map has been really consistent on the top end. We do the top 10 most likely to flip. West Virginia was the wire-to-wire number one spot there. Montana number 2 the whole time, and Ohio 3. And then after that tier of those Trump won states, the way we think about it then is the presidential battlegrounds. And even in there's kind of been separation between the top 3 races in there: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and then the 2 in the Sun Belt with Arizona and Nevada kind of bringing up the rear here, because those candidates don't have the same amount of ability to self-fund. The polls have shown the Democratic candidates there ahead. It's tightening in the closing weeks here, but that's kind of the tiers that we've been thinking of it. We don't do it in the rating of like toss up or lean like you guys do, but your work helps inform how we think about our ratings as well.
I think ultimately, especially I think Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, a lot of topic of conversation between Nathan and I over the last couple days, and between us and our sources and contacts that we're always trying to get information from. And those races are tightening up. You go back a month, 2 months, and Tammy Baldwin and Bob Casey were posting pretty substantial leads in their polling. And since then, Republicans have spent a lot of money, worked very hard to take the shine off of those Democrats who were considered to have kind of pretty strong personal brands. Casey, part of a political dynasty in Pennsylvania. Tammy Baldwin, a longtime legislator from Wisconsin who has always worked very hard in the more rural parts of the district to keep her numbers up. Ultimately, the way I see it is that I would expect both of those candidates to do a touch better than the presidential. I think largely, in the same universe, we're not looking at big over performances. But if we think the presidentials are still toss-ups, which I think you kind of have to think in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, those are toss-ups, and then the Senate candidates are doing just a little bit better, in my mind, coupled with the public data that we have there, that points to a tilt rating.
Can I ask you guys this? One of the questions that we pondered a lot when doing our Senate ratings was if all 7 of those presidential battleground states, let's think of the 5 that have the Senate race in there, which one of these candidates is most likely to split ticket here and outrun the top of the ticket? So if Harris wins all 5 of those swing states with Senate races, which one of these GOP candidates is in a position to split the ticket and win? Same for Trump as well, of who is in best position there. And I was wondering if you guys thought about that at all, or have any thoughts on who's the best position to win in a split ticket scenario in those 5 races: the Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, or Arizona.
I think the data would point to Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania.
That's what we were thinking too.
I think he's slightly ahead, but Hovde, I think Hovde is just behind, or he is within range of that, of where McCormick is. We're really kind of talking about a point or two, I think. But maybe Jacob, do you disagree?
I'm going to stake out some controversial ground here. I don't think any of those Republican incumbents are going to outperform Trump. Or not,
The
sorry,
Republican
not
candidates.
incumbents. I don't think any of those Republican challengers, excuse me. I'm not sure if the Republican incumbent, I mean, I don't think Deb Fisher is going to outperform Trump either. Put
going
that
out on a limb. Going out on a limb there.
I am not convinced that any of those candidates will win if Trump is losing their state. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if Trump loses Pennsylvania, I really struggle to see how McCormick wins. If Trump loses Wisconsin, I struggle to see how Hovde wins. Rogers in Michigan, certainly Kerry Lake in Arizona, Sam Brown in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that any of those candidates. I would agree, Nathan, that it seems like Dave McCormick of all of them is the only one who almost is even trying to win over Harris voters, right? I think that he has been making a bit more of a concerted effort. You know, he brought in Nikki Haley recently to campaign with him. I think that, so if there were to be one to do it, I think it would probably be him, but I don't think any of them are going to get there.
Yeah. Well, I want to make sure that we get it. We talk about the House, and I think there's a race for president. But I guess I'll finish our Senate piece with, I think we're all most confident in what's going to happen in the Senate compared to the White House in control of the House of Representatives. I mean, it's not a guarantee for Republicans gaining control of it, but it is much more certain than these other two pieces. But we should talk about those. So let's move on. We also made 15 rating shifts in our House races and updated our overall projection for control. At this point, we see the most likely outcome is anywhere from a Democratic net gain of 9 seats to a Republican net gain of a single seat. Remember, Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats for control. So that means that that control is almost smack dab in the middle of that range. Of those 15 individual shifts that we made, 5 of them were shifts toward Republicans or were in Republicans' favor. 10 of them were shifted toward Democrats. You can look at those rating changes on our website at InsideElections.com, or those of you that are subscribers, you already got them in the newsletter. So check those out. But Kirk, what rating change stuck out to you the most from that batch?
Well, there were three things I wanted to talk about here. Is the shift in a lot of these races, the majority of these races that you shifted were going toward Democrats now. And I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about why do we see in the closing weeks here, the race for the House at least start tilting a little bit more toward Democrats when we still think the presidential race is a pure toss-up here? Is that just a fault of the map, the fault of the candidates here? Because it just seems like the control of the House is very, very closely tied to the control of the White House as well. So I'm interested in that split. But I think the ones that stood out to me the most before we get into that 30,000 foot picture is the split in the Iowa races. Now, Jacob and I've had a lot of talks offline about the Iowa races here. And so I'm really curious about what you guys are seeing in there, because when I've been talking to some of the Democratic and Republican strategists, they're lumping both Iowa 3 and Iowa 1 kind of in the same boat. Yes, it's getting a little bit more competitive than they thought it was going to be in these closing weeks here. But you guys moved, I believe, the Marinette Miller Meats race from a toss-up to tilt Democratic in the 1st district, and then you moved the Zach Nunn race, again, both Republicans, and I was third from toss-up to tilt Republican. So I was wondering if you could walk me through the process of splitting those ones there in Iowa.
Yeah, I think you've identified the 2 races that have garnered the most post-rating shift conversation and feedback. And I would say
by saying conversation and feedback there.
But it's been very productive. And if we didn't have our tilt category, these I think are broadly a toss-up. But when we looked at these individually, and Jacob has thoughts as well, with the 1st district with Miller Meeks, we see a race where she is underwater. That's a beltway term for her unfavorable rating is higher than her favorable rating, and it's been pretty bad and pretty consistent. We've seen her underperforming Trump in the district compared to Christina Bohannon, the Democratic candidate, who's running a better campaign than previously. And so ultimately, Trump could end up pulling her across the line, but we've seen more surveys with Bohannon in the lead. Miller Meeks underwater, and that has been a challenge. Now, Nunn's favorable rating, his image was poor. I don't know, a few months ago, but it looks from what we've seen that he has repaired that image. He's doing better. But it's still a tight race, but we're trying not to have 1,000 toss-up races. And so looking and making these small distinctions, we kind of push them one where we think that they are very slightly tilting. But Jacob, you know these races better than I do most.
Yeah. So Kirk, I thought you might ask about this, which is why I teed up a little bit of ad footage.
You are always prepared. You're a Boy Scout, man.
from both of these candidates in Iowa's first district. So if everyone's all right with it, I think we can take a quick listen to ads from Democrat Christina Bohannon and Republican Marionette Miller Meeks, and come back after that.
I'm Christina Bohannon, and I was proud to run track in high school. So it's pathetic that Marionette Miller Meeks is trying to panic you about girls' sports instead of tackling our toughest problems. Miller Meeks picked her team, the Washington Special Interests. My team will always be Iowa. That means cutting middle-class taxes, protecting Social Security and Medicare, and fighting for our reproductive rights. I'm Christina Bohannon, and I approve this message because I'll always put Iowa first.
What's wrong with Professor Christina Bohannon? She has nutty ideas, like supporting radicals trying to defund police. Bohannon would let biological boys play girls' sports. Nutty Professor Bohannon supports sanctuary cities for illegal aliens in Iowa. She even stays silent while Chinese companies buy up our farmland. She's nuts. But Army veteran Marionette Miller Meeks fights for Iowa. She's leading the fight to protect our farmland.
I'm Marionette Miller Meeks, and I approve this message.
Those were two ads from Iowa's first congressional district, which we moved from toss-up to tilt Democratic. I think this is our most kind of out-of-the-box ratings change. I checked the 538 model yesterday before we made the change, and I think they had Miller Meeks as like a 65 or 70% favorite in that race. So we are going against a little bit of conventional wisdom here. But ultimately, we took a look at this race, and it's one that as Nathan said, Bohannon is ahead of Miller Meeks in the data that we're seeing. She's been up consistently. She's got a significant spending advantage. I took a look at the competitive a couple days ago, and I think over the last week she was outspending Miller Meeks by well over $1 million on the airwaves when you counted all the Democratic and Republican money. And, even though she's an incumbent, I think that we should keep in mind that aside from Miller Meeks' win over Christina Bohannon in 2022, she typically wins races by a very narrow margin. I mean, she beat Rita Hart.
Six votes.
Six votes. Exactly. I mean, the closest House race of the country in 2020. And that was when Trump was winning that district by a couple points. Her state Senate races were I guess the only state Senate race she was in was very close. And then, she lost to Dave Loebsack for Congress 3 times over the course of the last decade before she was finally able to win in 2020 when Loebsack retired. And not only that, but she only won her primary this year by about 4,000 votes against a guy who spent $4,000 essentially against her. So even though she's an incumbent, I think she's got a real problem in this district. She's unpopular and she hasn't been able to repair that image. You put up an unpopular candidate. I don't know. Kirk, what do you think?
No, I wanted to ask you about the primary issue, because when I talk to folks about this race, they also point to she's got a Republican problem. Democrats love to point out that Marionette Miller Meeks has a Republican problem right now. I just find it a little bit hard to believe that when November 5th rolls around, that those Republicans aren't just going to put on their jersey and vote for her. Like, again, you're right. It was an incredibly narrow win for her in the primary, but I don't know. Maybe I just am underestimating how unpopular she is, but I just don't feel like people who are going to go turn out to vote for Trump are going to leave Miller Meeks blank or write in somebody else here right now.
And that's what it could, and that is a very plausible case for her reelection. This is a good example of, as we try to explain how we do this overall in every race, is we try to collect as much data as possible. So the very limited public polling data on House races that's available, and as much private partisan data as we can, and we line it all up, and we literally go district by district, and in some cases, Colorado's 8th district, for example, it is as neck and neck tied as it can get, right?
We struggled so much with where to put that race in our top 20 ranking as well. That was tough.
Yeah. In other races like this, in other races that are competitive, it's very clear who's ahead. In this one, it's a little bit murky, but we thought that there was more on Bohannon's side, and so that's why we pushed it. But this is going to probably happen, that if a race, just because a race is tilt Democratic does not mean that a Republican can't win. I mean, sometimes people, and I know, Kirk, you're not in this, but people think we only have 2 categories, toss up and solid. Like, well, we're going to move it to tilt. They're like, well, he can win or she can win. Like, yes, we know we're not, that's true, but that doesn't mean that it's a 50-50 coin flip, in our mind.
I was just going to say, I pulled the numbers. Trump won that district when Miller Meeks won by 6 votes. Trump won it by 4 points in 2020.
Okay. And that's the newly drawn district.
No,
right?
no, that was the old district.
Oh, okay.
When she won in 2020.
Got it.
She did so by underperforming Trump by 4 points. So,
but Jacob, you should talk about Kirk's first question, because I think you have talked about this trend. We've talked about this trend about why there was the narrative of the Democrats winning the House, I think, was further ahead than our individual House race ratings and even our own projections. But now it is coming, it has gradually shifted in Democrats' favor to even. But you've talked about this before, but can you explain to everyone else?
Well, before you jump in, Jake, I just wanted to say that, Nathan, I remember a few months ago, you had a really interesting column in Roll Call looking at the open seat races that Democrats have to defend and how that might give Republicans a little bit more of an edge in the race for the House. Now, I remember when that dropped, I had a few strategists reach out to me and ask me what I thought of your column as well. And I thought it was really smart there, but now we're at this point where it seems like it's shifting toward Democrats. So I just wanted to bookmark that. So Jacob, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I think that we tend to give incumbents the benefit of the doubt in general, and that serves us well typically because there are advantages to incumbency. But when you've got a lot of Republican incumbents who are vulnerable, that's part of it that can maybe make the ratings a little bit of a lagging indicator. I think that when we started our race ratings, it was a very different national environment. We were looking at a very unpopular Joe Biden running against Donald Trump, who had kind of reconsolidated support among a lot of people, looked stronger than he ever had before. And that was the basis for our House ratings. And we didn't, when Harris became the nominee, we didn't scrap all our ratings and say, all right, starting from total scratch here in late July, what are we going to rate every single one of these races? We adjusted piece by piece. And so I think that because the environment shifted so abruptly, it's taken a little while for that to seep through into the data. And then finally, I just think that voters don't really tune in to a lot of these races until the last month or two. And so in a district that a Republican represents, but maybe leans Democratic, a poll isn't going to tell you very much from January to August of that year. I mean, Oregon's 5th district, I think, is a perfect example of this. This is a race that has been tied between Lori Chavez-DeRemer, the Republican incumbent, and Janelle Bynum, the Democratic nominee. Everything was tied out of that district for months and months and months, even though it's a Democratic-leaning district. And now, finally, in the closing weeks, after tens of millions of dollars, it's obvious Harris is going to win here. Biden carried the district by double digits. I think Harris is going to do well here. And Bynum is slowly but surely pulling ahead as voters wake up and say, wait a minute, I'm not going to vote for a Republican. And so I think it's just taken some time for the reality to set in for some of these Republican incumbents. And that's reflected in the ratings.
Well, I read an interesting poll from last month about Oregon 5 from the fine folks over at, I believe, Noble Predictive Insights. They partnered with some race raiders and show that, Joe Biden pulling ahead there. And that's also to your point on the timeline of when people start tuning into these races. It was post-convention. I believe you guys were in the field in there. The ticket had been settled. This is a Biden district, like you said, and it showed Janelle Bynum, the Democrat there, slowly start pulling ahead. So again, I just want to thank you guys for doing God's work out there and pulling these House races. I know Jacob and I talked a lot about the lack of polls in House races this cycle, except for you guys making the concerted effort. So as a political junkie and a recovering House nerd, I've appreciated the polling this cycle.
Yeah, we did 7. If we had we have learned firsthand that polling costs money, folks. And I'm appreciative of Mike and the team at Noble Predictive because we did get a discount on those. But I want to say there's going to be a lot of criticism if Chavez DeRemer ends up losing. There's going to be a lot of criticism about her campaign, and particularly some of her ads. I want to play at least I think it's her most recent or one of her final ads. It has two Lorries, and I just don't even understand what's going on. But let's play that ad, and then we'll talk about it in a sec.
Hi, I'm Lori, and I'm here to talk about why I'm running for Congress. And I'm Lori, and I'm here to call BS on some of the stuff you've seen on TV. I'm proud to be one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. Meanwhile, Janelle Bynum is trying to trick people into believing she's not an extremist. I passed legislation cracking down on drug traffickers and supporting law enforcement. And Bynum voted to decriminalize fentanyl and supported defunding police? Hey, you've got my vote. Thanks. Same.
Well, yeah, you're gonna if you're listening, you can watch the YouTube version of this and see if that ad makes more sense when you visualize it. But anyway, we'll see. Before we move on to the presidential race, Kirk, what would be a surprise for you in the House?
Pretty early on in the night, I know there's the two bellwethers that we keep talking about a lot are Virginia 2 and Virginia 7. I would be very surprised if early in the night that a party picks up both of those ones. If the same party wins both of those. If Republicans keep Virginia 2, flip Virginia 7, or Democrats flip Virginia 2 and flip Virginia 7. That we don't have a great pure bellwether toss up within those first 2 hours of polls closing. You guys just shifted Virginia 7 to tilt Democratic. I forget which one you guys have Virginia 7 or Virginia 2 right now.
Tilt Republican.
Tilt Republican, and we actually were debating a lot about including that in our top 20 list of most likely to flip. It is the first 4 out. If we were to write that column, it was just outside the top 20. I would be very surprised if a party won both of those, because that's going to be a really good indication, I think, of how the rest of the night's going to go. I don't think we're going to know exactly how that night's going to go until much, much later into the evening, if not the next day. So that would be very surprising to me if they both went the same way.
All right, we should probably talk about the presidential race. So let's move on. And finally, you may have heard that there's a presidential race going on too. Here's some closing messages from the Harris and Trump campaigns.
Election is a choice between two very different visions for America. I will take on price gouging to bring down grocery prices. I will lower the cost of health care insurance. Donald Trump, well, he wants to give more tax breaks to the wealthy. I will cut taxes for the middle class instead. You may not always agree with me, but I promise I will do everything I can to lift up the middle class and be a president for all Americans. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Kamala wouldn't change a thing? Their weakness invited wars, welfare for illegals, while Americans struggle. Now Kamala wants higher taxes on top of higher prices. We can't afford 4 more years of Kamala.
So the question that I get constantly, and now I'm posing to all of us, is there any way to discern that either Harris or Trump has an advantage in what is statistically a close and no statistical difference between the two candidates? Is there any? Does anyone have an upper hand?
I'll take a stab. I've maintained for a few weeks now that it's still Trump's race to lose. He's been doing everything in his power to do it. I think what's really remarkable here is how Harris, it's been almost 100 days since she's got the nomination. It is incredible to me that she's been able to throw together this campaign operation from not scratch, because she inherited a lot of the Biden infrastructure, but turn what was probably going to be a little bit more of a blowout, at least by contemporary standards, if Biden stayed in, into this toss-up race here right now. And whether that's because of pure partisanship or because she's a really masterful campaigner, that's probably will be determined if she wins or not. But I really do think it's a remarkable story that she's been able to throw this together here in 100 days here and make it as competitive as it's been. So I'm not trying to make a prediction either way, but I still think that given the general attitude towards folks right now, that toward the direction of the country, still feelings about the economy, which might be lagging behind actual economic indicators, that it's still Trump's race to lose, but he's doing everything in his power to do it.
Jacob, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll take the opposite side there. I've said this for a while. I think Harris, you'd still rather be Harris than Trump at this point. I think not to be the it's all TV guy, but the spending advantage that the Harris campaign and her allies at like Future Forward PAC have put together is just, when you pull the competitive, it is stunning. The degree to which I think the pro Harris has outspent pro Trump on the airwaves every week of this election since September by $30 to $40 million across the country. Harris continues to lead in national polling, which again, we don't have national elections, but I think it's an indicator of the environment. Democratic enthusiasm still is outpacing Republican enthusiasm, and I don't really want to underrate the possibility of kind of the kind of post-Dobbs energy that we saw in 2022 persisting. And then I can't wrap my mind around the Republicans outsourcing their field organizing, their GOTV efforts to Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk. It really, that seems like a real unforced error to me. We've seen horror stories come out about Elon Musk's operation, which, I mean, you talk about the Harris campaign throwing together something from scratch. That guy is truly throwing together something from scratch there with potentially suboptimal results. But I think it's just, it's a really close race. The number of vibe shifts we've gone through over the last 3 weeks, it's like for a little while, it was like, oh yeah, Harris is in the driver's seat. And then Trump, for whatever reason, it was like, oh, Trump, this is Trump's now. And then, we've got the Madison Square Garden rally, and it was like, oh my God, now it's Harris. And then, Biden made his silly comment and it's like it's Trump. And then you get the LeBron and Bad Bunny and Nicky Jam pulls his endorsement from Trump. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe does Harris have the momentum again? And I don't know. I'm just ready for results. I
would love to talk to the voter who was waiting to decide between the two until LeBron James stepped in and everything. That is the voter I want to talk to right now.
Well, if you go into the TikTok comments, I think you might find some.
That sounds like a hellhole, Jacob. I will never go into the TikTok comments for anything.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I feel so bad because I've talked to so many groups over the last few weeks, and I know that here's this guy coming in. He's going to tell us exactly who's going to win, and I can't. It is close, and what I do know is that somebody is going to be humbled by these results. It is remarkable to me that the people that we talk to that are smart, sober strategists, people who are not the rah-rah cheerleaders of the party, they're doing the work, they're in the races, and I think both sides have this kind of optimism, cautious optimism that they're going to win, Republicans and Democrats, and that one of them, only one candidate is going to win. And so someone's going to be, whether it's Democrats being humbled by losing to Trump again, or Republicans humbled by losing to Harris and their, figure who can do no wrong, losing the race, someone's going to walk away with a lot of questions. So, but what I root for in elections is decisive results. Let's get decisive results and move on, and hopefully we'll get those.
Now it's time for our final segment, look what I found. This is when we talk about something we've stumbled across in the last week or so that's interesting to us. It doesn't have to be political. It can be a TV show, an album, or something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. So, Nathan, kick us off here. What did you find this week?
I don't know about if it was this week, but I found that I have a problem with Nerds gummy clusters. And by problem, I mean I eat too many of them. I spent too much time last night as we were trick-or-treating thinking about which house might be delivering those into one of my boys' one of their bags. And it's kind of an issue for me because they are delicious. Not a sponsor, but Nerds gummy clusters are ridiculous. So I admit I found that I have a problem.
Are you the type of dad who strong arms their kid? Like, did you see that in the bag and you're like, hey, I'm walking you around out here. Like, those are mine over here.
Well, one house did give away not a snack size, but a regular size Nerds gummy clusters. And I was giving my son a bad time. Like, oh, is this is mine. This is Daddy's. And he was not, he likes them as well. So I did not, it would have been obvious if I would have tried to, one of the pieces the parents try to steal from the kid, it would have been, I let him have it. I did not steal it. Don't comment on it. But it's a problem. I love them.
I got to say that, like they say, the devil works hard, but the Nerds Gummy Clusters PR people work harder, because that candy has I'm going to read you a few headlines in the last week about Nerds Gummy Clusters. Axios, why Nerds Gummy Clusters are the it girl candy right now. New York Times, inside the colorful and cultish world of Nerds Gummy Clusters. Inc.com, how daring to be different made Nerds Gummy Clusters a top-selling candy. Wall Street Journal, America's newest hit candy is gummy, crunchy, and printing money. Slate, a weird mutant candy took over the internet. I went on a dark quest to find out why. So whoever is doing the PR for Nerds Gummy Clusters,
I had no idea. I didn't know I was so hip.
Nathan,
although
you caught the wave.
You're in the pocket of Big Gummy Cluster.
I wish, if they're offering sponsorships, we're open to conversations. But I don't know, Jacob, what did you find?
So I found a similar. I'll continue in the similar vein here. I was at a Halloween block party last night on Halloween and was handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. And this one kid had this only in DC costume that just had me and my friends cracking up for several minutes afterward. A group of young girls came by, and most of them were kind of dressed in traditional Halloween costumes. And had normal candy bags, but the last girl in the group, she walks up. She's wearing shades. She's wearing a black shirt that says IRS, Internal Revenue Service, and she's carrying a briefcase. And she doesn't say anything. She just walks up to me. Everyone else is taking candy from the bowl. She opens up her briefcase and just goes, "Taxes, please." And
what?
I did a double take. I wasn't sure what to do. And then I realized she wanted me to put the candy in the briefcase. So I put the candy in the briefcase, and she snapped it shut, and she said, "Thank you for your compliance." And she walked away.
Wow, that's impressive.
I love that.
It was great. It was, only in DuPont Circle would you find that, but it was pretty funny.
It's
unique. Is that your
unique.
inspiration for next year?
Maybe, yeah. One of Biden's 36,000 IRS aid. I should have asked her if she was worried that Trump was going to take her job away. Yeah.
One of my favorite costumes that one of our kids have ever done is our son, Abe, when he was younger, wanted to be Abe Lincoln crossing guard. And we're like, can you explain that again? Like, how do we make this happen? And it ended up being him in an Abe Lincoln costume and a crossing guard at the same time. I didn't ask too many questions. Like, okay, Abe Lincoln crossing guard. It is.
What would you do there? 4 years ago, please only turn right on the light here. Like, what are we doing?
When you think about it, what is a president but a crossing guard for the whole country, keeping order,
or the world, or the world?
That's a New York Times pitch pot tweet if I've ever heard one there.
All right, Kirk, what did you find?
My thing is, I'm gonna just peel back the curtain a little bit here, Jacob and I are in a big old group chat with a bunch of other election nerds here, and a lot of them have actually been guests on this show previously. And we try to get together every so often, compare notes, hang out. And the last few times we've gotten together has been at a local spot in Capitol Hill called Barrel. It's a whiskey bar over on closer to Eastern Market there on Pennsylvania Avenue. And again, Jacob, continuing your trend of only in DC stuff, for the entire month of October, they are doing pop-up theme bars every weekend of the most recent presidents. They've done everything from Clinton to George W. Bush to Trump, Obama, and this weekend they are doing Biden. Jacob and I have been to the George W. Bush one together, where they had themed cocktails and themed specials, old campaign merch and everything, giant cutouts of all the presidents as well. We went to the Obama one the other week, and I'm going to try to visit the Biden one this weekend to close it out. But I'm a big old nerd, as anyone who's this deep into the podcast might have surmised. And I loved the theming and the campaign and just the pageantry of making election season a little bit more fun.
I wonder if they're going to continue it and go even further back. The James K. Polk week or something.
They'd probably have some great Tennessee whiskey there and everything, but it would only be for one night because he's a single termer and everything. Exactly. And then they would move on from there. But I hope that this inspires them to do something like that, because it's been very fun and very, very nerdy.
Well, you could do the William Henry Harrison. It would just be like 6 hours.
One person talking for a long time, like one speech.
Yeah. And Kirk, you left out the best part, which is that at the Trump pop-up, which was last week, one of their signature cocktails was it an old fashioned that they were doing with Pappy?
It was a Pappy Van Winkle old fashioned for $125 that they sold in a plastic goblet, and it was called the Golden Arches. And I was offended spiritually by how they were serving that. Nothing partisan or nothing political about it, but just that you're serving Pappy in a freaking plastic goblet.
Oh my God, $125. You know how many Nerds gummy clusters you could buy for $125? This is
pounds and pounds and pounds, I'm sure.
But well, anyway, Kirk, thank you for joining us. If you, for those of you listening and watching, you need to follow Kirk and his team at National Journal's Hotline. Read everything. Listen to their podcast because Kirk does a great job, and his team very funny. Not all of them can be as good at cornhole as you, but you can aspire and lead them. But thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the other side of this crazy election.
Thanks for having me. Every time I listen to you guys, every time I read you guys, every time I talk with you guys, I learn something. So thanks for teaching me all the time.
That's all the time we have. We walked through our latest ratings changes and prepared for an exciting election night with National Journal's Kirk Bado. Thanks for listening. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you didn't like today's episode, please email LeBron James. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tuzinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us next time.